In my last video, I talked about TryHackMe and all the resources they have for any beginners who are wanting to get started in the cybersecurity field. Specifically, I talked about the Junior Penetration Tester learning path, and I went over the first lab in that path, which was the Intro to Offensive Security. Originally, I was just going to continue on that path and make a video on the next step on that path, which was the Intro to Defensive Security. Unfortunately, the Intro to Defensive Security requires a subscription. I briefly mentioned this in the last video, but TryHackMe does offer a paid subscription, which unlocks some extra features like some other labs, including the Intro to Defensive Security room. But if you're a beginner and just getting started on this stuff, they still have plenty of things you can do for free, and there's really no need for that subscription yet. But if there is anyone out there that wants to get a subscription, I do have a referral link in the description of this video, which will give you a $5 credit after you get that first subscription. Again, you don't have to get the subscription. There are plenty of free resources on this website and plenty of others like it. But if you do want to get that subscription to TryHackMe, that referral link is in the description of the video if you want to use it. But going back to the learning path, which I was talking about before, since the Intro to Defensive Security is behind that subscription, I didn't really want to make a whole video about it since there wouldn't be that many people that would probably get much value from it. But I did want to continue making some more videos on these labs on this journey for the Junior Penetration Tester path. So I'm going to jump forward to the Introduction to Web Hacking, and in this video I'm going to solve the Walking an Application Challenge. If we take a look at the first task, it says, in this room you will learn how to manually review a web application for security issues using only the inbuilt tools in your browser. More often than not, automated security tools and scripts will miss many potential vulnerabilities and useful information. So for this challenge, we're not going to use any sort of fancy hacker tools. All we're going to be using is our web browser. And that last part I read is true. There are a lot of automated scripts and tools and different things that pen testers can use, which makes their jobs a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. But those automated tools can miss things. So it's important to understand what those automated tools are actually doing so you can make sure that they're finding everything you need to find. And you also need to be able to go back and verify that what those tools found is correct and you're not just getting false positives. So to get started in this lab, first we're going to click Start Machine. Once we click that button, we'll need to wait a couple minutes, and then we need to go to this URL that they give us. And once we go to that URL, it should open an Acme IT support page. This is going to be that website that we attack during this lab. So the next section explains a little bit about exploring a website and how you can go about doing this and what you should look for when you are exploring a website for the first time. And this is a pretty important step when you're pen testing a website. When you're given access to a site to pen test, one of the first things you should do is just open up the site in a browser and start exploring it. Just click around, try to figure out what the site does, how it can be used, and that can help you identify different things that you can look for during your testing. So the next section is about viewing the page source, and this is where we're going to actually start looking for some flags and doing some actual practical lab work. And if you read through this information, it will tell you how to view the page source and tell you a little bit about that source code and what to look for. And to do that, we're just going to right click on this site and we're going to click View Page Source. And that's just going to open up another tab in our browser and it's going to show us the HTML source code of that page. And if we scroll down to the bottom of this section, we see that it's asking for 4 different flags that we're going to find in this source code. So the first flag it's looking for is in the HTML comment. So if we look back at the HTML code, we see that there's this green text at the top and at the bottom. These are HTML comments. Comments can be really helpful when you're doing a pen test on a website because a lot of times developers will leave some helpful things in those comments. And if we look at the very top comment, it says this page is temporary while we work on the new homepage at /new-home-beta. So that tells us that they're actually working on a new page, but they give us the location of that page. So we can just take that /new-home-beta and we can tack that onto the end of our URL. And when we access that page, we get a flag. HTML comments are dangerous. So we can copy that flag, paste it in here, click submit, and we just found our first flag. So the next flag, it says, is from a secret link. If we look back in the HTML code, we see that there are a bunch of different links in here. This Ahref is linking to some other page in the application. So we have a link to the /news/contact/customers. And if we keep looking, we might see another link that looks a little bit suspicious. Down here at the very bottom, it says our dedicated staff are ready to, and then it has a link to secret page to assist you with your IT problems. So once again, if we tack that link to this secret page on the end of our URL, when we open up that page, we get another flag, not a secret anymore. And again, we paste that in there for our second flag, submit. Now we have half the flags that we were looking for. We just have 2 more to go. So the next one is a directory listing flag. Again, looking back at the source code, you'll notice that a lot of these links, it says /assets before it gives us the file name. That tells us that there's a directory called assets, and all these files are being stored in that directory. So let's see if we can just access that directory itself without going to a specific file. Again, we're going to tack assets on the end of our URL, and it opened up that assets directory. So this is called a directory listing. And if you find this in a website, this would be a good finding to put in a pen testing report. Typically, you don't want to expose these directory listings to a user because that allows them access to all kinds of files that maybe you don't want everyone to be able to access. And it also reveals the directory structure of your application, which can be used as part of other larger attacks if you have that information. So once we're in this directory listing, we can click on avatars, for example, which is another directory. You can tell because it has that / at the end of it. And we see that it has a bunch of PNG image files, and it has all these different little avatars. And we can go through and look at all the files in this directory. But you may notice there's one file in here that looks a little bit suspicious that we should take a look at a little bit closer. And that is flag.txt. And when we access that file, we find another flag, invalid directory permissions. And we can submit that flag. Now we just have one more flag to go to solve this section of the lab. The next one is a framework flag. So like I already mentioned, comments can be a very helpful thing to look at during a pen test. And if we look down at the comment at the bottom of the page, it says that this uses a THM framework version 1.2. Obviously, this THM framework is not a real framework. It's just a made-up thing by TryHackMe. But seeing version numbers like this can be really helpful. For example, if you find a reference to Apache in some specific version in a website, you can do a little bit of extra research into that version of Apache and see if there are any known vulnerabilities that might be applicable to that application you're working with. In this example, though, they actually have a link in that comment that gives us some more information about this THM framework. And when we go to that link, it tells us that the current version of that framework is version 1.3. And if we look back at our comment, it says that this application works with version 1.2. So if we do a little bit of extra research, we might be able to find something that we can use that was in version 1.2 that was fixed in version 1.3. So a good place to start is let's take a look at the change log. And under version 1.3, it says we've had an issue where our backup process was creating a file in the web directory called /temp.zip, which potentially could have been read by website visitors. This file is now stored in an area that is unreadable by the public. So older versions of this framework, including version 1.2, which is what we're working with, was creating this temp.zip file, which is accessible by users. So let's go to temp.zip and see what happens. When we went to that temp.zip, it actually downloaded a zip file. And when we opened that zip file on our PC, it actually contained a file called flag. And inside that file was that 4th flag that we were looking for. Now we found all 4 flags in that section, and we got all of them using just our web browser accessing the HTML source code. If we move on to the next section, we're now going to get into the developer tools. And the first one we're going to look at is the inspector. Now, depending on which browser you're using, how you get to these developer tools might be slightly different, but TryHackMe gives us a pretty good little handy guide. If you click on this View Site button in the top right corner, it opens a split screen, and over on the right, it shows you a little guide on how to access developer tools depending on what browser you're using. So if you read through this section, it's going to explain a little bit about what the inspector does, and it actually tells us that we're going to look at the news section on our Acme IT support website. And we look at this news page, we see that there are 3 links here. And on the third one, it says 3 tips for keeping your printer working, but this one has a little star next to it. And when we click on it, it says, sorry, this article is for our premium customers. So they essentially have a paywall that prevents anyone from accessing that content on the website unless they pay a premium. But we are going to use the inspector to take a little bit closer look at this paywall. So if we look in the inspector, we can see this premium customer blocker, which is essentially the paywall. And when we click on that, we can see over on the right side, we have all the CSS that is related to that class. And right here, we see display block. Just based on context clues, I'm going to assume that that block is what is preventing the website from displaying it to us if we're not a premium subscriber. So I'm going to replace block with none. And when I hit enter and I close inspector, I can now access that content that was previously behind that paywall. And I can also see a flag, not so hidden. And when I submit that flag, I've now completed the section on the inspector. The next section covers the debugger. And it does note here in that first paragraph that in Google Chrome, this tool is called Sources, but in Safari and Firefox, it's called Debugger. And if we continue reading, it says that we're going to go to the contact page to use this tool. And when you go to the contact page, you might notice a little flash of red when the page loads. If I refresh the page a few times, you might notice a red box appearing right above Contact Us. So this is just kind of some weird behavior that we want to use the debugger to just figure out what that red flash is and see if there's anything interesting about it. So we're going to right click the page and click Inspect, and we're going to click Debugger. Now we can see over here on the left that we have an assets folder, and we're going to open that, and we see a JavaScript file that's called flash.min.js. So when we open that file, we can actually see that this whole file is smushed down into one line of text, which can be really difficult to read and understand. But fortunately, the debugger has a feature called Pretty Print, and we can use that by clicking the curly brackets down here at the bottom. And when we do that, all of a sudden, the file is much easier to read. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we can see that there's this function that says set timeout, and then it says flash remove. So we're going to use a function of the debugger called breakpoints to try to stop the JavaScript from executing at this moment so it doesn't go away and we can actually see what that red box is. So to set that breakpoint, we're going to click the line next to the code that we want it to stop at. Now that we have that breakpoint set, we're going to refresh the page. Now you can see that the execution was paused right as that red square was visible, and now we can read that it is a flag that says catch me if you can. Now we're on to our last task, which is using the network developer tool. So following the instructions, we're going to stay on that contact page we were just looking at, and we're going to use the network tool to analyze what's happening when we click the send button. So now I'm going to the network tab in the developer tools, and while that tab is open, I'm going to click send message. So we can see it sent a post request and this contact-msg file. And when we double click that, we see this JSON file that says message received, and the flag is THM got Ajax flag. And we can copy and paste that and submit it. And now we have completed the entire room and have finished the walking an application challenge. So this was another pretty simple video from the junior penetration tester path, and we didn't really do anything that fancy in this video. We didn't use any fancy hacker tools or do anything with a command line or anything like that. But I think it's really important, especially if you're a beginner, to start understanding as early as possible how to do some of these things manually without relying on any sort of automated scanning tools. If you want to have a career in cybersecurity and be a penetration tester or anything else really, you need to find a way to actually give value, and knowing how these manual techniques and things work is how you find that value. You want to be able to take that report that anyone can generate with an automated scanning tool, and you need to be able to make sense of it and be able to prove why some of those things on that report is correct or incorrect. Let me know if y'all are liking some of these beginner focused challenges from TryHackMe. If y'all are liking them, then I'll probably keep doing at least a few more. If not, maybe I'll move on to something else.